Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're on page 1259. Aleph Reish Nun Tes. And 2/3 down. So we're learning about these two levels in Gan Eden. Gan Eden as its natural Gan Eden as God created it, which is Havaya Lekim, which is higher than the rest of the world, because Havaya, the name Havaya radiates there, which in Veda he called it Moichin, radiating into Midas. The Malchus is on the same level as Zah, like Achesi, a sister. Okay. And then there's what Avoda, the service and the work that the human being does that increases the energy in Gan Eden, and that's called Yizbu'u Atse Havaya. So Atse Havaya, the trees of Havaya, that is the trees of Gan Eden, which include the souls that nest in those trees, the birds that nest in those trees. And then there's a Yizbu'u, which means to sate, to fill up these trees even with more energy. So to explain that, we're learning now all about what does Yizbu'u mean? What does it mean to fill up, to sate? And he made it clear it's more than just filling the tank, so to speak, that no longer hungry, but it's overpouring. So it's like wealth, not just the absence of poverty. It's not just the absence of hunger. It's like wealth, richness. In that itself, he explained there's a hunger that comes from not eating, which that maybe can be the absence. That when you fill that hunger, it's so now no longer have the absence of hunger. And then there is a hunger that comes from eating, from consuming. In this case, we're talking about Torah. Torah is compared to food, to bread, that when a person eats it, they are hungry for more. And that's the hungry soul that transforms the bitter into sweet. Then there's the sated soul, Nefesh Seveya, using the verse in Mishlei 27:7 that he began on the bottom of page 1257, which we're in the middle of explaining. And what's a full soul? That's a higher level in Torah, higher than Birurim, higher than eating, higher than hunger. Why? As he explained, because we're one with it. You're one with it, he says. So it's not like hunger implies there's you, and you're hungry for something you don't have. But if you're one with it, I'm using the words he said, when he's mesached mamish, a person becomes made etzema eir, and I just want to see the actual words. Shenasa dover echad mamish, and meir boya atzmi, then there's no hunger. In the hunger itself, he explained in the parentheses on top of 1259, it's just worth repeating that there's two elements to it. One is because it's in a process of eating, meaning that he's receiving energy through eating. So when he's used to because he's used to eating, he wants more of that. And that's because he's not one with it. And the second point he made, because even when he is mevarer, even when he eats and when he consumes and he does the bitter, you're not getting the etzema, you're only getting the the energy as it manifests his slapshus. Okay. So it's more when you're eating, you have more energy than when you're not, but it's still not the very core energy. Whereas the level of Birurim, with the level of Torah we're talking about is higher than Birurim, and therefore it's higher than hunger. So to explain, he says, and this is the meaning, and this is what we're in the middle of, this is the meaning that the sated soul, Tovus Nefesh, is like tramples upon and doesn't value at all the honeycomb, the sweetness. What does this mean? So he brought the pasuk, another pasuk. Hanechmodim mizavu paz. It's more precious, more dear, more cherished, more desirable than gold, and both levels of gold, zav and paz, which I'll explain in a minute, and sweeter than honey and the honeycomb, and the dripping honeycomb. So first he explained what is zav. Zav is the sharvat. Zav refers to a level gold, refers to the level of the divine as it manifests in existence, the kav. That's why the sharvat hazav, the golden scepter, which the king extends, which is the kav that extends, but it's the energy commensurate to existence. And in the spheres, it's the level of Bina. Then there's a pure level of gold, Paz is a deeper level of gold. That's Chochmah. But it's still all Chochmah and Bina as it relates to Yichud Chitzeni, the outer dimension of Chochmah and Bina, of Abba Ve'ima. And that's the combination why Baruch Sha'amar V'Hoya Elam has 87 words, Paz, 87 words, and it begins with the words Baruch Sha'amar V'Hoya Elam because it's talking about the energy that relates to existence. Baruch Sha'amar V'Hoya Elam, Sha'amar V'Hoya Elam is an acronym for Shaveh, because this is the energy. It's the energy, the equal energy that's encompassed in Ak. But in the outer dimension of Ak, that's like the bird's eye view, that equalizes the entire existence. But it's all related to existence. And that's the pasuk saying, Nechmadim. Now, however, Torah, that's higher than Birurim, higher than this level of Chochmah Bina as it manifests and relates to existence. Nechmadim is over Paz, the Torah, B'chinas Yichud Pnimi. That's the inner Yichud of Chochmah Bina, which is higher than Zav, than Chochmah Bina, Zav and Paz. That's what we learn. That's what we read. That's where we are up to. The line that begins, He mebchinas yichud pnimi. And we don't need to re-explain yichud pnimi because he discussed it at length. That's already how Chochmah Bina are gazing upward at Arich and Atik, and they're experiencing something beyond hunger and filling the hunger. So filling the hunger is like saying, okay, something's lacking, we fill it. But when you reach this level that we're talking about being really sated isn't just that your absence of hunger, that you filled up the tank. You're talking about receiving completely new levels of energy that we're going to discuss, which comes from the Yichud Pnimi of Chochmah Bina. So it all is consistent with what we've been learning. Now he's going to continue because we still have to go to the second half of the verse, which is about sweeter than honey and the dripping honeycomb, which is going to bring us back to the pasuk we're concerned with here, Nefesh Sveya Tovas Nefesh, that the Nefesh Sveya, that he's talking about the filled soul, the sated soul, which is going to come back to explain to him being Yizbu, the sated trees of Havaya and Gan Eden. Okay, that's the context. So let's continue. The line's around 2/3 of the way down on page 1259. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. And I'm beginning from V'yadu Umesukim Midvash. So he explained Nachmadim Mizav Upaz. Now, Umesukim Midvash, and the Torah is also sweeter than honey, V'nefes Tzefin, and the dripping honeycomb, which is, of course, a very high level. It's sweetness. It's not just minimum like bare bread, like we said. This is a delight. It's the sweetness, especially nefesh, the level of dvash. So he's going to explain, what is the level of dvash and nefesh? He says, dvash v'nefesh hem b'chinas enig. Both of them indicate and refer to a level of pleasure. Like anything sweet always indicates pleasure, because something that's like plain, you could say it can fill you and can sustain you, but sweetness means something sweeter than regular, which in Ruchnius means a higher level of pleasure. Avol hu einig hamurgish. But when it comes to honey and honeycomb, it's still an einig that's felt. Like when you eating honey, you feel sweetness on your palate. So he calls that einig hamurgish. Remember, we learned before about einig bilti murgish, which is going to be the higher level that we're discussing now. So that's einig hamurgish. V'yadua the betainug atzmi. It's known, and he's going to sum up something we learned a number of times, that in core pleasure, we're not talking about external pleasure. External pleasure means it's not touching necessarily a core part of the essence or the soul. It says, in teinig atzmi, yesh gamkin beis madregas. There are also two levels. Echad hainug atzmi hababa murgish. One is a core pleasure. It's coming from a deep place. It's not just, as I said, superficial pleasure. Pleasure, let's say, from learning Torah, or something that really is on a profound inner level of pleasure. But hababa murgish, it's felt, you sense it. There's a clear sensation. You're feeling pleasure. Va'abeishu bilti murgish klal. And the second is not felt at all. And I explained this, I'll just sum up what I've explained. It's like the difference between when there's still a subject and an object. I am here, I'm tasting something that's sweet, And I could say, right now, I eat something that's sweet. And then, so it's more of a verb, an experience. It's not a state of being. What happens if you become so one with the sweetness that you no longer say, oh, here's me, and here's a sweet state I'm in. You become it. Like we said, Molar is Deus Hashem. You become water. You become knowledge. It's so absorbed within you that you become one with it. Then it's not built, it's built in Murgish. It's like I've pointed out many times, that's just as an example. Someone asks you, what does healthy feel like? What does it feel like being a healthy person? The answer is very straightforward. If it feels like anything, there's a problem. If there's a feeling, that means there's something, a sensation. Health should be so invisible and smooth, you don't feel anything. What does it feel like to breathe? It's just breathing. If you hear the breath or you feel the breath or the heart, meaning in a pronounced way, it means something is either overworking or something's blocked, God forbid, etc. So, like if I asked you right now, what is your left leg doing? Until I mentioned it, you weren't even paying attention. You don't know what your left leg was doing. That doesn't mean you don't have a left leg, God forbid. It doesn't mean there's nothing happening. It's just you didn't think about it. It's just part of who you are. That's what real life is. It's seamless. So it doesn't have a sensation. Once you think about left leg, you say, oh, my left leg is resting on the floor, or I've lifted it up. In other words, sensation indicates already a level of experiencing something. Whereas the state of being means that you are it. And when you talk about atzmi, ultimate atzmi is obviously, it's it. It doesn't have to experience it. Whereas we all experience things because we are not atzmi. But there are examples in our lives of atzmi, like I just said. It would be similar to also, you ever meet a master, a real expert in something. You ask them something, they give you immediately an answer, and you say to yourself, where do they get that answer from? It's in them. It's become so absorbed in their way of thinking. And then there's a level lower than that where here's a question. Okay, let me think about it and come back with an answer. The difference is one has become one with the knowledge, at least in that area of expertise. And one, the knowledge is still being acquired. It's still something that you have to reach out for. So in a sense, when you say I'm hungry, so hunger is, of course, a state of deprivation, a lack. Then you fill up the hunger by eating. So that's still a hungry person has eaten. But a true filled person, what he's going to say here, a soul that's really sated, is not a soul that right now I'm filled and then tomorrow I'm hungry again. You're talking about someone that's so connected that there's no sensations, and therefore there's no sensation, including of any of hunger and so on that we're describing here. So sweet. So he said this is the level of einig bilti murgish. So there's two levels. That's two levels. Bilti murgish kla. And now he's going to explain how these two levels exist in the future when Mashiach comes. That we have these both levels that will be revealed. The einig that is felt, like this honey or honeycomb, and the einig that's beyond being sensed, which of course is a higher level. And this is going to be the connection to Gan Eden ultimately, because Gan Eden is not the future. Gan Eden is still a level of Gilui, but we'll get to that soon. So these two levels of Tainug, he says now, the Ayin Beis Aliyahs de La'asid. These are the two great elevations that will happen in the future. What do we know? The first one is a Echad, Sudas Levyasin B'Sher Habar, will be a meal. There'll actually be a meal. We'll eat the Levyasin, the great Levyasin, which is the great fish, and Sher Habar, that powerful ox. That's what it says, Lasid Love, with all the meanings behind it. But the bottom line is equated with a meal. Suda, a meal, a feast. Sheyir Lasid, which will be in the future. Shezeu b'chinas ha'eneg ha'atzmi hababa murgish. That refers to ha'eneg ha'atzmi, a core eneg. It's not superficial, but it's felt. I mean, even physically, if you're eating a piece of fish or a piece of meat, you're going to feel you're eating, like we're speaking about the level of eating, the sensation. In Ruchnius, the Alter Rebbe speaks about it in Likutei Torah and other places, it's talking about two levels of godliness. One is Almediskasi, the fish, the hidden worlds. Asher Habar is a mammal, an earth mammal, that's the Almedisgalia, the revealed worlds. But regardless how you explain it, the bottom line is there is sensation. V'yadua, so that's Atzmi Ababa, V'yadua, the Sher Habar is, okay, spelling it out even. Sher Habar hu inyan habirurim. Sher Habar has to be, it's like an animal, it has to be shech, there's a birurim. This is the Likutei Torah I was referring to. Didn't realize he's quoting it. Okay. Like it says Likutei Torah, Pasha Shmini, Dibra Maskal of Yosin Ze Yatzarta, Vahabir. In the Maimer that begins Levyosin Ze Yatzarta, this Levyosin you have shape, and an explanation. There's the Maimer and there's an explanation of that Maimer in Likutei Torah. I believe he quoted this Likutei Torah before. Am I correct? A few pages ago, I think. Maybe not. I'm almost sure. I remember I said Sazri and it was not Sazri. It's Likutei Torah. Let me just see quickly. Okay, I don't see it offhand. Fine.
As far as I remember, we mentioned it, but he didn't bring it in.
Okay, could be. Okay, good. But anyway, there he talks about Sheira Bar is Birurim. Because just to give a little explanation, let me just see what he's going to say here. Yeah, because fish in the sea, including Levyosan, don't need shchita. They don't need slaughtering. Because fish are like pure because they are in the water all the time. Like they're in the mikveh all the time, so they have a pure state. Birurim associate more with the souls that connect to, we call the land souls, not the waters, not Nuni Yama. So Levyosan is a different level. It's more of a level of Gilead Lakus, but it's still Murgish. And Sheira Bar is more Birurim, like we're talking here, Birurim through Achila. And you see, it's the digestive process when it comes to an animal it requires more digestion, more work, more to break down the elements and so on. And fish in general are healthier than meat. Okay. Vim ken yesh leimer, says that Rebbe Rashab. So being based on that Sheira Bar is that this yesh leimer shezel mashabola acher gmar habirurim. Now, since we're eating Sheira Bar and then Levyosan the Sud Asid Lave, so what do you mean? You said Birurim. Birurim is really the Avodah Zman Agolos. Now, so he says yesh leimer. Based on that is Birurim. We're talking about that after we finish the Birurim in this world, in Elam Hazeh, in this stage, that through the Birurim that we do now, which means now before Mashiach comes, through that we come to the end of the Birurim. The end will be that meal will be like the culmination of Birurim that we were doing all along, and through that Birurim that we come to this level. That's a yesh leimer that Rebbe Rashab is saying. Who inyan? And what is the inyan of this? V'achaltem ochel techelu dover shekfar nechal. What is the achaltem ochel techelu? It says what's the echel techel? What's the double meaning? Because you're eating something that was already eaten. It's like it's not regurgitation. But it's like it's like called a second birur. In other words, through the work we do now, we consume, and not just physically consume, just in general. The birurim of separating and refining and clarifying and elevating the sparks. Then when we come to Gemara Birurim, will be like the birur that concludes it. So he's calling that the shekfar nechal, commission is bar le'el be'erech. Like we learned at length, he means volume 2. I believe it was about the man that you're dealing with, or not the man, Shabbos. I think that's what he spoke about. In other words, his one job is to separate food, the waste or the husks, the pseil is the waste from the nutrients, from the eichel. That's the avodah b'zman hazeh, choil. Shabbos, and including Yom Shekulei Shabbos, is the avodah eichel metoich eichel. You've already, so to speak, separated the waste. Now the eichel itself you want to elevate. So that is absolutely allowed on Shabbos. So he's saying eichel metoich eichel. I believe that's what he's referring to. Which means it's already gone through a stage of refinement, and now it's going through a higher stage of refinement. I have to find where it is in volume 2, but I recall this discussion. So this is the level of Sudas Levyosan, Sheira Bar. He doesn't really talk about Levyosan here. He talks about Sheira Bar, but Sheira Bar is very clearly he's explaining in the context of what we're learning that La'asad Lavi itself, we're going to have two stages. So stage one is the end of Birurim. That comes through the Birurim that we do now, and especially emphasizing Sherabar, which is really Birurim. Levyosin has a role in this as well, but it's not relevant so much to this discussion here. That's Einig Murgish. What about Einig Bilti Murgish? So Ayin Beis, the second aliyah, the second elevation in the future will be clearly, it states clearly, there won't be eating and drinking. That Sudas Levyosin Sherabar is a meal. However you twist it, it's a meal. What means seems like a contradiction. They will have a meal. Says Chassidus, the Alter Rebbe says it in here, and in Mefarshim as well, that talk about this. That's two stages. One aliyah, one tkufa, one stage is the meal that we just discussed. Einig atzmi murgish, you sense, you feel, the end of Birurim, etc. And the second, ein ba'achila v'shtiya, higher than hunger, higher than eating altogether. I want to share a chiddush from the Rebbe on this in a moment. Let me just finish the statement here. And it continues. And what will tzaddikim be doing? What will people be doing? Yeshvim v'atareseim bereishehem. They will sit, excuse me, and their crowns will be on top of their heads. Excuse me. The crowns will be on top of the head. What level is crown? Remember, we learned about crown. Atara she'itra imay. Remember the mother. The mother crowns Zah. So this is a level of a crown that's higher than Midas. Higher than Moichin going into Midas. This is how it becomes the level of the mother. And the crown on top of Zah, that the Hamshach of Bina into Zah from a higher place. V'hu einig ha'atzmi ha'bilti murgish klal. And this is the level of the core einig. They both core energy, core pleasure, but it's built in murgish klal because you're become one with experience, one with the entity. So it's not sensed at all, as I explained before. Okay. So of course he's explaining here. He's going to explain the difference between. Therefore, while we say nefesh seveh tovis nefas, you're saying that literally that there's the sweetness of the honey and the honeycomb. But then we're talking about mesukim midvash, the nefesh seifim. Even sweeter than that. What's even sweeter is going to be the einig bilti murgish. That's where he's concluding. I'm just keeping the context here. The chiddush of the Rebbe, and the Rebbe has a famous essay. It was printed in what was called Shuvas Birurim in Kovitz Lubavitch in the early years, in the 40s. Later reprinted, now it's in volume 2. I mentioned it many times. It's an unbelievable, it's, in my opinion, required reading by everybody, especially if you want to understand Mashiach. The Rebbe has a real a good few page introduction to what is the inyan of Mashiach, and a very palatable and clear explanation that you can give to anyone, very universal. What exactly is Mashiach and Geula and the stages? So there, it was in response to someone asking the Rebbe, what's the inyan of Tchis HaMesim, of resurrection, and the details, when will it happen, who, and all that. So at the end of that essay, which was really a letter, but you can call it an essay. At the end, the Rebbe writes that it's mashman l'kut Torah that elam haba ein b'chachila v'shtiya is the same tkufa, the same period as the meal of the V'yasin Sherabar. So the answer, we say that it's 2 stages, okay. But some places it seems like it'll be in the same stage. And the Rebbe says, Yesh Lemer, beautiful answer, very balabatish practical answer. He says, Ein ba'achila v'shtiya doesn't necessarily mean you won't eat. It means you will eat, but not to be sustained. Now, in Elam Haza, achila v'shtiya is necessary. Without it, we don't have food. We can't sustain ourselves. We may eat, but for different reasons. It doesn't have to mean birurim or because sustaining ourselves. So even if you say Levyosin Sharabar is in the same stage, Ein ba'achila v'shtiya, it's still 2 different elements. One is, yes, there's the sensation of eating, einig murgish, but at the same time, there's also another aspect, even though that has not to do with the eating of this in this world, where we eat in order to sustain body and soul. Today, you don't eat. The body and soul will ultimately, God forbid, will not be able to life will not be sustainable. Whereas Lashon Lava, you can eat for different reasons. That's just the Rebbe adds this. It's not negate to our understanding here. It would just really mean that you can have the Einig Murgish and Einig Bilti Murgish, just two stages, even in the same period, two levels of Aliyah. That's all I wanted to say because it's a Geschmack of words. I just wanted to mention. Okay. Now, says the Rebbe Rashab. Let me stop here for a moment in case any questions. It's not finished yet, so I would like to go on to just finish the piece. But in case there's something that needs clarification, anybody want to ask anything or comment? Okay.
I'm sorry, that source you said about the Rebbe's Sikha. I have a pen now. I want to write it down. Could you just briefly, what is it again?
It's not a Sikha. It's in the letter. It's printed now in Igros Kodesh, Volume 2. I don't remember the page. You'd have to go through the index. A long thing where the Rebbe talks about Chis HaMeis and Mashiach. As I said, it's required reading, in my opinion, for everybody.
It came in the first form with Shiur.
I said it last time too. It's required reading. So I guess,
Shiur to Birurim.
It was originally printed in the Kavitz Lubavitch was a Kavitz, a publication the Rebbe published every, I don't know how often, for a while, in the years 1943, 44, 45 approximately. In it, there was a column that the Rebbe wrote answering questions, Shuvas Birurim. I actually modeled Chassidus applied the end. I always answer a question based on the way the Rebbe did it there. So he would call it Shuvas Birurim. Later, they took all the questions and the Rebbe's answers and published it in a small booklet separately called Shuvas Birurim. And now the easiest place to find it is in the Igros, Volume 1, Volume 2. They're scattered there based on the dates when they were written. But you have all, it'll say in the bottom that was printed in Shuvas Birurim and Kavitz Lubavitch, so you can identify. This is around 10-page essay that goes through the whole introduction, Mashiach, Geula, and then the stages, Olam Haza, Mashiach, and Chis HaMeis. Really, you'll see what I mean. Very, very clearly explained the purpose of creation, how all of the world gets more perfected, how it continuously evolves to higher states of refinement, and how that will ultimately unfold first in the stage Mashiach, then the stage of Chis HaMeis. Talks about the stages, many details there. There he talks who will rise, in what order they will rise, and a lot and more details about that. The Rebbe brings it all together in a very powerful essay. Yeah. Okay. So now
the Rebbe Rashab is skipping here the word tzaddikim. It said there, ein bo yachil or shtiyo, tzaddikim yeshvim v'atoisei.
He took out the word tzaddikim.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, Amach Kulim Tzaddikim, everyone will be Tzaddikim then. Second of all, he doesn't want to emphasize, that's not the emphasis here. He's just bringing what's Negeya, is Negeya, the Ein Ba'achil V'Shtiya and the Atreseim. Okay.
What is Torah Sheet Oloi Imui?
I already explained it. It's a whole piece in Ayin Beis. It's the third level of Imi. That's the Torah, the Kesed of Zah. If you want to know more, go back to page. There's a whole discussion on this. It began, where was it? Well, it began on page 1249, but the exact Torah Shitra Imai is yeah. Okay. Page, where is it? Probably page, yeah. It's 1253, 1254. Yeah. Also earlier, if you go back to page page 1248. Anyways, the higher level called Kesed, where there's the level Achesi is Gan Eden on its own, with the neshamas that are nesting, the birds that are nesting in the Eitz Atzei Havaya of Gan Eden, and that is the level of Zah. Malchus is on the level of Zah, like Achesi, like we learned in the previous page, and Atara Sheitra Le'imai is Bina. Imai is Bina that is being mashpia into Zah. That's how Malchus goes even higher, And that's the higher of Yichud Abba Ve'ima Pnimi that he's talking about, that's higher, which he's now going to spell out what that level is. And that's the Einig Bilti Murgish. So he says, V'hu Einig Asmi Bilti Murgish Klal, as I explained, Bilti Murgish, that it's like beyond hunger, it's one with the entity, like we learned on top of the page. The Zeu Amitis B'chinas Taimei Teda. This is the true level of Taimei Teda. If you remember, he spoke about, on the bottom of page 1258, he said, so there's a level of Taimei Teda that is a lower level. That would be Taimei Teda. Like I said, Pnimis HaTeda is called Taimei Teda for two reasons. It's the inner reason, is the reason. Time means the tam, the reason for mitzvahs. And Taimei Teda also from the word tuf tam, that is delicious, that delicious taste. And of course, it's Haba Hatalia. So the higher level of Taimei Teda, he says the true level of Taimei Teda, she's Galu La'asid, like the Rashi says on the Pasuk Yishakein Menashikas Pir, right in the beginning of Shir Hashirim. So he says that there will be revealed the secrets and Taimei Teda La'asid Love. Chassidus brings it, the Rebbe brings it. This is the level B'chinas Rozin, next page 1260. The Rozin, the secrets of the secrets, Hasoid, Shu Sosam Be'etzem. So there's a secret that's fundamentally concealed. This you may recall, we learned it a number of times, that in Moiches Timah, Chachmes Timah, there's something can be concealed, but it's capable of being revealed. It's like you don't know it now, so it's concealed from you. Or it's not right now accessible, but you can ultimately access it. Then there's something called Sosam Rozin Dirazin. What means the secret of secrets? That it's so secret that it can never be revealed. In other words, what it means is it's not subject to revelation because it's an atzmi. It's being it. Like I said before, it's not experiencing it, but being it. And when you're it, there's only one entity, and that is called Sosam Be'etzem. Olav Hashalom Ligulesam Gam Be'idra Zutra. He's giving an example of the secrets of the Torah that was not given, the permission was not granted to Rashbi to reveal these secrets, even to the Idra Zuta. I'll explain what that is in a moment. And the only thing that Rashbi was able to do is just say it to himself. Like it's written in the Idra Zuta on page 291, the top of B, of the second page there. Okay, so the Idra Zuta I've mentioned a number of times. There's in Zohar, you'll find there's a Idra Rabba, Idra Zuta. Idra means a gathering or a group, a communion. And there were two groups. There was a Idra Rabba means the large group. Idra Zuta means the small group. Rashbi had primarily 10 students where we taught Primis HaTorah to. They are called the Idra Rabba. So in Zohar Nosei, Pasha Nosei, there's a section called Idra Rabba where he gathers them and reveals to them, these are some of the deepest parts of Zohar, very, very cryptic and mysterious. A lot about Chassidus, actually, the secret of the hair, and all the different Amshachas, Zohar, Ampin, and Natik. It's very complicated. Chassidus, of course, deciphers it to some extent. Then 3 of these students passed away in time. So there are only 7 left. And that was called the Idra Zuta, the smaller group. And this is printed in Zohar Parshas Hazinu. So in Parshas Hazinu, you'll see there's a section called Idra Zuta. This actually is the section where Rashbi talks about Rashbi's passing. Lag Ba'omer. Like all the expressions you hear, B'chad Katira is Katarna, and the different things Rashbi revealed, those big secrets, are Idra Zuta. That's why he says, and yet there were secrets that even to the Idra Zuta he was not given permission to reveal. And all he could do was say it to himself. But it's documented in Idra Zuta that that's what happened. That there's secrets that were not revealed, and only Rashbi said it to himself, like whispering to himself. So he's using that he says in secrets of Torah itself, it's the secrets that are Sosam Be'etzem, but he's referring to Einig Bilti Murgish. That they can't even be expressed. They're inexpressible. This is what we say, Umesukim midvash v'nefes. when we say the Torah is sweeter than honey and honeycomb, we're talking about this level that's built in murgish. Honey, like he said, is einig murgish, is a very deep level of secrets of Torah, but it's still sensed and felt and experienced. And then there's a higher misukim. What's sweeter than that? Something that's not even felt. In other words, it's not sweeter in quantity, like sugar could be sweet and honey is even sweeter, and then there's other different levels of sweetness. We're not talking about a higher level of sweetness, we're talking about a completely different paradigm of sweetness that is completely beyond sweetness that we can taste and tangibly or palpably experience. In Ruchnius, that is that level that we've been talking about, like I explained, like lo yiro, when he says, Hashem says to Moshe, you can see me by not looking my face. So there are things you see by seeing them and experiencing them. And there are things, the only way you can see is by not looking, by not seeing them. In other words, basically suspending all your resources, all your faculties, and then the experience just becomes part of you. And there's no two entities. And that's Einig Bilti Murgish that we've been learning about throughout the last pages. Even the Ava B'chol Moedecha, totally absorbed, where you don't even feel it's completely consumed with it. And now he goes back to the pasuk, Valkain Nefesh Sheveya, and this is what it means, that a sated soul. Remember, a sated soul. He said, "B'bchinas Svia be'etzem," not just that you're sated in contrast to hunger. In other words, the absence of hunger, the lack of hunger. But now it's Svia be'etzem. You're fundamentally. He said that word a few times. Svia atzmis, Svia be'etzem, Svia be'etzem. That fundamentally you're completely filled. So he says a soul like that, where you have the gili of etzem shalamaylam habirurim, that's higher than birurim, which is where you still have to separate, to divide, to clarify, and so on. Where there is a sensation, like you said before, of birurim, and birurim, that's where you have the world of hunger and thirst, and then you could sate the hunger and thirst. But here it's etzem shalamaylam habirurim megamri. So what does this type of soul do? Toves nefes. Toves literally, as Rashi says, there means to trample upon. It really means that you completely, not only you disregard it, it's meaningless to you, and it's worse than meaning. It's completely insignificant. Why? Because he's higher. He's much higher than the tangible or the palpable pleasure of honeycomb. So that's why it says Tovas Nafshe. So there you have the pasuk, both halves of the pasuk. The second half talks about a hungry soul, which is a level of Torah that connects to Birurim, where the Torah itself is involved in Birurim. The Torah itself is the exertion that's necessary, not a matana. And that, there you say, Kol Mar Masuk, it transforms the bitter into sweet, as we explained on page 1258. And the first half of the pasuk, Nefesh Svei, is talking about someone who's on the higher level of Torah, like La'asad Lavi, the higher level of Einig Bilti Murgish, and there it's Tavis, anything that's felt, sensed, is completely insignificant to that level of pleasure, of Taimei Torah. And now he's going to bring it back to Yizbu Atze Havaya of Gan Eden. But I'll stop here for a moment if anybody wants to ask anything to clarify. If not, I'll just read now. He's going to bring it all back to the beginning of the topic, which began on page 1257. So after this longer explanation, we're going to understand what it means to be sated. Any questions? Okay. Zehu. You can
Sasom be'etzem, Rabbi, but it's mashma from here that the Rabbi was able to understand that or access that.
It doesn't say he understood it. It says that he could experience it internally. It doesn't say he understood it. It just said he said it to himself, which means it could be he was on that level where he does that, where he's just part of he's one with the entity, and that's that. That's number one. Number two. One second. Number two, remember Rashbi, how high he was, it's still not la'asad lavi. He doesn't distinguish. Here he says it is that level, Kamoy say this, but he's giving an example. There are secrets, there are things you reveal, there's secrets you reveal, which is like Einig atzmi, but it's morgish, and there's secrets that are not revealable, and therefore not that. Yeah. And Rashbi was on a level where he could experience that.
I guess that's why when they wanted to evoke his good stuff, they used to call him Shabbos, and they would bring them. It was higher than Birurim, like Shabbos, and they called it Raspi Shabbos. I mean, it's incredible stuff.
Everything is relative. Okay. So, moving on, or somebody wants to comment or say something? Okay.
No, it said that the Rashbi was not allowed to reveal it. That means that he had it.
The way he's explaining it here, I would not say that. He was not allowed to reveal it, not because it was unrevealable, not because he could reveal it and then they chose not to. Because it is a level that as soon as you reveal it, it's no longer sos and betzim. That's how I would explain this piece. It's like as soon as you see it, it's no longer the thing itself. Okay, so you could that can mean many things. I mean, here he wants to make a case that it's not just another secret that you could reveal or only to yourself. He says clearly, Sashim be'etzem, meaning it's built in mortgage. So that's how I understand the context here. I mean, there are other ways to understand, but that's not the pshat here, to me at least. Amitis taimeteshes galos rosen de rosen, Sashim be'etzem. Anyway, I'm sure there are many levels in secrets. There are secrets where you could reveal to some extent, secrets that are harder to reveal, and there are probably things that are inexpressible that never could be revealed. He's not breaking it down. He's just giving an example. He's just expressing that these are the real Taimei Torah that are coming from the level of Enig Bilti Murgish. I'm explaining it a bit, but you could explain it many different ways. You could say there are levels. I'm not denying that. But I think let's keep the context of what we're speaking about here, which is Einig Bilti Murgish. It says, Bezehu Yizbu Atze Havaya. And this is, may the Atze, the trees of Havaya, of Gan Eden, be Yizbu, be sated, filled. Atze Havaya Hein Eitz HaChaim ve'Eitz HaDaas. When you say Atze, plural, is the trees of Havaya is referring to the tree of life and the tree of knowledge. The Eitz HaChaim who gamken shabol levadet. So now he's explaining even Eitz HaChaim, even though before he did say Eitz HaChaim sweetens, well, actually that was the lower level. It sweetens the bitter. So Eitz HaChaim. So even Eitz HaChaim before Yizbu is also comes to be mevadet. So in other words, Eitz HaDaas is very clear Birurim. Teivera, like the Alter Rebbe explains in the Geras HaKedesh Chavav 26, the Raya Mehemna, that Nigla the Torah is called Eitz HaDaas Teivera because it deals with kosher, not kosher, pure, not pure, taina shel sheker. But even Eitz HaChaim, he's saying now, is also part of, came to be mevader. So it's also connected to Birurim, and he explains. So Torah Shebal Peh is Eitz HaDaas, but like the written Torah, Shehi Chochma Brura Be'etzem, it's not like Torah Shebal Peh where you argue and discuss and you try to get a crystallized Libun Hilchas through the arguments and counter arguments, especially in Talmud Bavli, the Machshakim Heshivani. But it's Torah Shebiksav, it's Chachma Brura. In Torah Shebiksav, there's no arguments. Everything is clearly stated. When he says clearly, it doesn't mean that you could do a mitzvah based on Torah Shebiksav. Torah Bepirusha Nitna, you need its commentary, you need its explanation. But it means that what is shining in Torah Shebiksav is called Eir Yashar. It's not Eir Chezer. It's not Birurim, because it's very, very clear. This is what it says. And yet, even though it's Chachma Brura Be'etzem, fundamentally, Mokol Mokim, Harihu Lahavdil, Ben Atomi L'Toher. The Pasukim say, Lahavdil, to separate between the pure. Like in, let's say, Parsha Shmini or Parsha Gedeshim, where it talks clearly, Lahavdil Ben Toyer V'Tomei, Ben Tomei L'Toyer. So even the Torah Shebiksav, which is the level of Eitz HaChaim, also comes to be Mevada. Now, but then, in Torah Shebiksav, it's more statements that says this is pure, this is not pure. And Torah Shebal Peh develops that, the Pirusha Nitna explains it, evaluates it, argues about the nuances, and to get a clarity of a halacha. So Torah Sheba'al Peh is more Birurim in the sense, because it really gets involved in all these back and forth, and you're dealing with arguments and disagreements and so on, and pure and impure. Torah Shebiksav is more from above, like an oyer that shines, it's clear, but it's still involved in Birurim. But in Torah itself, there's a higher level that he's going to say now, which is higher than HaChaim and HaDaas. So here's what he says: V'yizbu atzei Havaya. V'yizbu, not just the trees of Havaya are about Birurim. The Birurim in Gan Eden, the Birurim in general, Torah Shebiksav, Torah Sheba'al Peh. What's V'yizbu? Hu b'bchinas shviya ma'agili b'bchinas taimei Torah. You're not just revealing Torah Shebiksav, the taimei Torah, the innermost secrets and innermost dimensions and taste, even the taste and the inner reasons of Torah, b'madrega hayesel yena, in the highest level, the highest possible level, shalamayla b'chinas habirurim, that's higher than birurim. So, like when we say that Torah is shashuyim lefanov, God's delights, there we're talking about Torah not as it comes to clarify what is right and what is wrong, or what is pure, what is not pure. There you're talking about the inner dimension of Torah, like when you learn really Pnimius HaTorah, even though in Ageres HaKedesh, HaChaim is associated with Pnimius HaTorah, but in that itself, there's even a deeper level, like we said, Amitis Taimei Torah, that will be revealed in the full sense in the future. That is completely beyond Birurim. It's nothing to do with Birurim. This is basically immersing yourself in godliness and understanding God and learning about God. And it's not about clarifying, and it's not about hunger or no hunger. You're in it. I remember Lahavdil seeing an advertisement. It just came to mind for a motorcycle that said, transportation for those who are already there. So there's transportation for those that are not there. So they need to get there. But then once you're there, you're already in it, in the divine. There's also transportation, meaning in it, you also are continuing to grow there. But it's a growth that's coming, being in the source, not out of the source. So it's not hunger for something, it's experiencing it. Like when we say Tzama Lecha Nafshi, or all the expressions of Ava, Kirish Be'esh, or the love that we are desiring, longing. Remember, we learned levels. We learned level. There's thirst, there's longing, Cheles Ava, sick, love, sickness. And then all that demonstrates that there's a level that you're not there. You wouldn't be thirsty if you're there. So you're thirsting for it and you're longing. Then there's being there. Once you're there, it's a very different experience. There actually, once you're there, the focus is actually bringing it back out to the world. So it's an experience of being one with the source. This is what he's saying now. And this is the abundance. This is the additional energy that comes in Gan Eden, beyond the trees of Havaya of Gan Eden, that is infinitely, completely infinitely apart from the level of Gan Eden on its own, which is the trees of Gan Eden. Let me finish in the paragraph, and then we'll stop for questions. Obefrat, and specifically, the Torah mitzvah sha'acher hatshuva. So this is what's coming after the Aveda of a person, and specifically after the Torah mitzvah that comes after tshuva. Tshuva is the v'haruach toshuv, that the spirit toshuv elokim asher nasana. Tshuva comes from the word return. What's returning? The spirit is returning. B'chinas tainug atzmi. Where is it returning to? Into the core pleasure. Shebenashamis Yisrael mitzad atzman. The neshamis Yisrael that are higher than Torah. Remember, tshuva is higher than Torah, and it brings them to that core. The neshamis commotion is bar le'il, like we learned earlier, where this is the highest level of imi, where Torah, Eden are higher than Torah and higher than Zah and higher than Birurim. So we've learned here that in Torah itself there's a level like that, but then there's, remember, Yisrael Kodmul Torah. I'm going back now just to tell you the pages that he's referring to. He's bringing it all together. Where was it? Yeah, it starts on page 1251, but specifically I'm referring to 1251. Where's the code? Oh yeah, 1251 and on, where he discussed this level of going all the way to the level of the neshamis, Tzad Atzman, The Ikar Agilui and the primary revelation of this level, Yeh La'asid, will be in the future. Ukamesha Kosav, like it says, B'yem Ashlishi Yakimenu, V'nichya Lefonov, and the fun of Mamish. Then the third day, Yakimenu, you will rise, V'nichya Lefonov, and live before him, Lefonov Mamish, meaning Mamish in the face of God, Pnimiuse. Now, why is it called Yem Ashlishi? Because sometimes it's explained, Yem HaRishon would be Olam Hazeh, the world in which we live in now. Yemei Mashiach, the first Kufa we talked about is day 2, like Sudis Levyosin. And the third Kufa, Olam Haba, Ein Ba'achil V'Shti, is called the third day when Tchias HaMesim happens. So generally speak, Olam Hazeh, Yemei Mashiach, Tchias HaMesim. But in the parentheses says, V'yadua de b'yem HaShlishi, Koya Yem HaKippurim, Zman HaTshuva. So he wants to just connect it to the tshuva. So Yom HaShlishi, sometimes the 2 days go on Rosh Hashanah, 2 days Rosh Hashanah, and the third day is Yom Kippur, which is the time of tshuva. Tshuva, we're talking now the highest level of tshuva, not tshuva on a sin, but tshuva on the fact that you're returning and connecting to the very core, the neshama to its essence. And this is in the main thing, the ikar will be la'asid, but we're talking about Gan Eden now. So he says, and as similar to this, who be Gan Eden is in Gan Eden, the tzaddikim nenim miziv teirosan v'avedasan, where the righteous benefit or enjoy from the reflection. They're taking pleasure from the reflection or the energy generated by their Torah and their avodah. So essentially, Gan Eden is a taste of it. It's not the full, but relatively speaking, Gan Eden has 2 levels then. The trees of Gan Eden, which is the level of Einag Murgish, as he explained, level of like honey, the level of Torah, as it relates somewhat to Birurim. And then this Yizbu, when you say Yizbu, may they be sated, is that which is added, a completely new quality and paradigm level of energy from Einag Bilti Murgish, which in the fullest sense will be L'Asad Lavi, but in Gan Eden also there's a taste of it. Like he also said at the bottom of page 1258, he said, Elam Chatir B'chayecha, like the Ovis, were given a taste of Elam Haba, he mentioned. So with that, he explained, Yizbu, the idea that how Gan Eden there's the worlds, that's Malchus, as it is in Biyah, Yichud Havaya Adnai. Malchus, like it's a daughter. There's Gan Eden, is Yichud Havaya Lekim. Havaya is introduced. Not just Havaya Adnai, but Havaya Lekim, a higher dimension where Achesi, the level of sister within the neshamas, the birds that are nesting in these trees, are on that level. And then comes the highest level, which is Yizbu Atzei Havaya, that fills Gan Eden with a whole new level of energy, especially after tshuva. The neshamas that are even higher, Imi, that are even higher than the Zoh and the Moichen that are connected to Zoh. And this is the higher level, is Yichud Pnimi of Chacham and Bina, that connects with, gazes at the Metzach, the forehead of Arich, and draws down from Atik, Shinai and Neherin, the 370 energies, as he said. As we learned, where was that? A few pages back, he mentioned it here again. Yeah, Yizbu. Shinai and Neherin, where was it? There somewhere. I just remember it last page somewhere. Maybe it was said last page. Okay. And that's the story of the connection of all these ideas that he's bringing together. Go ahead. Any questions, clarifications? Pretty powerful stuff, huh? Oh, yeah, okay. He said it here. He said it on page, the Ayin of Keserim, Ayin. Yeah, on page 1257, he compared Yizbu Atzei Havaya, the Atik, the Ayin of Atzei Havaya of Keser, Shinai Neherin, yeah, Moiches Tamad Atik Shabresh Aram Shamim Shabbat, Yichud Pnimi of Chacham and Bina. Now, the avoid of it, he explained earlier that we have the midas as they mature and the Moichin guides them. Bina revetzes im revetzes ala frechim, the mother guiding, hovering over. That's Yichud Chitzeni Chachma and Bina. And then you have the Midas, as they mature, they catapult Bina back to its equal stature with Chachma. And then they both have a Yichud Pnimi, Zivuk Shlim, a complete union that creates a new Neshamis, new energy, as they gaze at Arich and Atik all the way to these highest levels. So in Aveda, that's the complete absorption that comes to B'chol Ma'idecha, Mesidus Nefesh, that a person, that both the mind, the emotions, and the mind are beyond the subjective wiring of the person, completely new transformation, absorbed and one with, totally consumed. That's Negei B'Nefesh, very life dependence on his connection to godliness. So of course we're talking very high levels here, but as I mentioned many times, we all can find relative to ourselves each of these levels, just a matter of finding something that applies to us in that way. Okay. Good. Anybody want to comment, question?
When
We'll stop it
the
regardless at the end of this paragraph, so it's a good time for it.
when the yichud of Chacham Bina mistakel on a metzach of Arich, it brings down from Pnimius Atik or Chitzonius Atik?
If I recall correctly, he said earlier Pnimius Atik ultimately.
Pnimius. Wow.
You have to look, it all began, that topic began on page, if you want to really look it up, goes back a while, wow. Page 1237. And I'm almost sure that he was talking here Pnimius Atik ultimately as well. But the only thing is Pnimius Atik is like Seid Sasum Be'etzem. It can't be revealed. So it is really, everything is being absorbed there. That's how he explained it, like similar to what was consistent with what he's saying here. Yeah.
So what are they? You're saying that it's not able to be brought down because it's Sasam Be'etzem, that Pnimius Atik, or can be brought down?
Become absorbed in it. You can be absorbed in it, but you can't be you as a separate entity.
Right.
Like then it's mortgage.
Right.
It's built-in mortgage, basically.
Okay. And when it says built-in mortgage, which deals with midos, does it also mean built-in muskal?
Yeah.
Built-in muskal.
It's where Seichel experiences something that's beyond comprehension on our terms. It's where everything, like he said, when your mind is completely consumed with something that's negei b'nefesh. So it's not, you're not standing there as an individual that's contemplating on something. You're completely absorbed in the core essence. I highly advise and suggest to read the pages that go last 20 pages maybe, because all this he explains at length earlier. Right now he's just tying it together to explain how it comes into Gan Eden. But the very states of consciousness we're talking about and the higher states of consciousness are discussed earlier. Remember that you just have to keep one thing in mind. Consciousness is a lower state of being than non-consciousness. Because as soon as you're conscious of something, it means there's something to be conscious of, and you're not the thing itself. Like I mentioned before, health, life, anything that's real, you don't have to be conscious of. It's just there. Your consciousness is a level of awareness and gilui. And gilui and etzem are not, gilui already is something that's not exact etzem. But you could have Gilia Etzem because you experience it that way. So we begin with conscious emotions and conscious mind, but we're trying to grow to a place where we become so much in the zone that you're an extension of, and just like a walking elikus, instead of experiencing elikus. That's ultimately what we want. You know, when a person, for example, in Gashmias, we have many examples. When you're completely absorbed in something, in your own taivas or in your own needs, you also lose a certain element of consciousness. You become so much in it, nothing will faze you. You're completely obsessed. So imagine now using that obsession in elikus, that you're completely consumed and absorbed in a higher light and a higher energy. It's hard for us to imagine because we are self-conscious individuals and we see consciousness as an advantage. But the truth is, ultimately, when you from Chachma and Bina enter into Keser, they're losing their identity, but in the process of becoming something far greater and more real. It's the ultimate bittul.
Isn't that itself sort of negating what makes a human being a human, his seichel and his midos? I know what you're saying about in the zone. I understand
The
that.
answer to
But
that is
you're-
very straightforward. This comes after you went through your seichel and midas. That's exactly why you can't jump there. It's like a student takes 40 years to appreciate a teacher, but he needs the 40 years. You need to go through the steps of conscious emotions and going from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. You absorb these levels, you expand your horizons and your containers till you come to this point. Once you come, you're fully ready. That's why we can experience pre-symptom energy, even post-symptom, because it doesn't happen immediately. Immediately, you need a symptom, because without the symptom, we would be completely overwhelmed and burned, completely annihilated and obliterated in the presence of Erein Sof Lifnei symptom. So we must have symptom. So now the question is, so how do we go back? That's the whole point of the discussion, the whole theme of Ayin Beis in the last few hundred pages. And the answer is because we transformed the tzimtzum. The purpose of the tzimtzum was not to conceal, it was only to allow us to be, it's like a baby, a newborn baby. You can't give them all the food and everything you know and everything. First, you have to spoon feed them. As the child grows, the child can then become equal. Like first a daughter, then it can become an equal like a chaysi, and then it becomes a mother. It's even mashpia, to the point that the soul now and the person can not only absorb the higher levels, but even become one with them. So that's the only way it's going to work. Without that, no avodah, you're not going to that place at all. You'll never enter that place. So the whole point of reaching such a high state is only after we climb the ladder, which is the avodah of our lifetime and the avodah throughout all of history. Why didn't Mashiach come yet? Why is there no Geula? Because we are not there yet. We need to be ready for it. It could have happened earlier generations, then it would have been Gilim Omayla Lamat. Would have been God choosing to lift us up, even though we didn't earn it. But then it wouldn't be impnimius. If you want it to really be yours, you need the small step-by-step avodah. You can never get around that until we're able to absorb more and more, until we can absorb and even experience pre-symptom. But that can only happen when you go through the earlier stages.
But the neshamas that are right now in Gan Eden, even the Hayat Tzaddikim, the Rashbi, Moshe Rabbeinu, the Avos, are they at that level yet, or are they still?
No,
they're not.
No, they're not. And the Rebbe would answer you probably, why is it your business? Why do you care? But I'll say they're not on that level, because that's why the Asad Love is for everybody. Everybody wants to have the ultimate Gilead. Now, do they have a taste of it? We said they even had a taste of it on this world. You can have a taste of it. We're learning about it. So you can have some taste, but the full experience will be, like he said, Ikar Agili is L'asad Love. Look in chapter 36 in Tanya. He says, Me'ein ze by matan Torah. And that's why we need Torah, because without Torah, ein oiz el Torah, you cannot be contained elikus, because elikus is higher than our kalim. The Eibishter gave us a gift, Torah mitzvahs, that allows the neshama to internalize godliness to the point that we can connect and reconnect all the way to the highest levels. This is the basic avodah. Yeah.
Then once we're there at that level, which is a Lasid Lavo, we'll all be in the zone, and we'll be Bilti Murgush and Bilti Muskal in the zone, just experiencing highest levels of Alakus. So at that point, how will there be growth on the human level if there's not no Seichel and Midos being there?
First of all, I didn't say there's no Seichel and Midas. I say Seichel and Midas are experiencing something that's beyond their own parameters, natural parameters of now, first of all. So no one's going to be annihilated. As I mentioned many times, you've asked this question many, many times. You know that. And I bring always the pasuk. It says, Lo yilamdu oid ishas re'eyu. A person will not teach another. Ki kulam yedu esi. Everyone will know esi atzmus. Lemiktanam v'agdelam. From young to old. So there you have right there. How could there be young to old if everybody's equal? Because it's not the case. Remember, atzmus, built in murgish, is not a contradiction to having structure. God, just as he has the power of bligvul, he has the power of gvul. We don't understand that right now because we're either one or the other. But once you're in that place, Bilti Murgish and Murgish meet together. It's just not on our terms, it's on much higher terms. And in Atzmus, there's no static. It's not like you reach a destination. There is no destination. It goes on and on and on in these levels. You're talking in terms like today. You know what? You're saving for retirement, and you want to know what will be at retirement. Well, there is no retirement. You keep going and going because Atzmus is not limited to the word Bilti Murgish either, frankly. And for that matter, Bilti Murgish can go into Mektana V'Agdelim, and each of us experience it in a different way too. Even the Bilti Murgish can be experienced differently. It doesn't say that everybody will be one. It says there'll be the diversity. Everyone will experience their own way. And Yelchem Achayil El Chayil, Ein Lehem Anucha Lei Be'elam Haza V'Lei Be'elam Haba, which means there'll be a constant journey. But the journey won't be from negative to positive, from evil to good. It'll be within the etzem itself, within the Bilti Murgish itself will be a journey. And maybe you can't understand that today until you're there. That's just a brief way of saying it. There's a lot more to say on this topic. But this itself, the more, you see, you're talking as a human being who lives in the world of Murgish about Bilti Murgish. You're not talking like someone who's in the world of Bilti Murgish. This itself, that we're discussing this, shows you that how far we are from there, because it's not, we keep using language and concepts that we relate to. The thing is, the more Chassidus you learn, and the more you learn about Bilti Metzias Nimtza, and the more you learn about how Bilti Metzias Nimtza becomes one with Metzias Nimtza, which is the whole fusion and the interface, the more you start understanding how these things are not paradoxes, and that you can be in a place that's indeterministic and deterministic, Murgish and not Murgish, and so on. Here he's talking about the Murgish that we relate to. We taste it, we feel it. Then comes the Bilti Murgish, and that itself, trust me, goes on and on. So I would be careful in this sense. First, let's try to just understand our consciousness versus a higher state of consciousness. And then once you get there, and the more you get there, the more you'll be able to appreciate the continuing journey that continues from there on.
Go ahead, very clarifying. One more last question, if I may. Is this the level of Ekya? Remember the Rabbi speaks about the three? Yeah.
Yichud, where he said
the Yichud Panimi that we're talking about. Is this of
the
Bina
Yichud
and
Panimi he
Chachma?
associated with Imi was Yichud Havaya Eya. That was like Imi.
Yes.
It's not the highest level of Etzem, but in the spheres, if you talk about Biti Imi, Achesi Imi, this third level is a level of Yichud Panimi of Chachma and Bina. But you have to know where you're talking. If you're talking about Yichud Panimi of Chachma and Bina, you're talking in Atzilus. If you're talking about Tainug Bilti Murgish, you're talking in Keser and even higher in Atik and even Lifnei Tzimtzum. It all comes down to these are all levels, they connect with each other. But when you say Chachma and Bina gaze at the forehead of Arich and Atik, you're clearly saying there's Chachma and Bina, there's a forehead, there's also the inner, what's inside that head, there's Arich and there's Atik. So it's a connection to these levels. But it's still, you are defining them as different. Abba Ve'ima is not Arich, and it gets absorbed in it and becomes one with it, but it's still these levels. When you talk, the higher you go, the more it loses these identities. But that's a bigger discussion, which I don't want to go into right now.
No, I just was referring to where the Rebbe said there's the three names of Hashem, Elokim, Havaya, and Eya. The Eya, the highest level.
So I said Biti, Achesi, and Imi.
Imi
being the mother, Bina, when Malchus becomes a Mashpia, like the Neshamas that are higher than Torah. Yeah.
And that correlates to Eya.
That's Yichud. It doesn't say Eya. Yichud Havaya Eya. That's the exact expression.
Okay, thank you.
That is on page, where was that? Yeah, Yichud Havaya Eya was on, not already where it was. I know where it began. Yeah. That's Imi, yeah. Well, he says it's clearly on page 1249, but also he repeated it a number of times. Okay, we're stopping here at the end of the paragraph on page 1260.